Welcome to the IDP Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hungarter. You guys can find me. My Twitter handle is @IDP Hunter. As you guys know, I'm a writer over at the Fancy Six Pack, IDP Plus. I'm also a ranker. I'm the number 4 IDP ranker over at Fancy Pros. Tonight, we're going to dive into the NFC West. We're going to talk offense. We're going to talk defense. But I'm not here alone. I'm here with an offensive juggernaut, an offensive superstar in the making, if you will, an offensive genius. Let me introduce you guys to Rahul. Rahul his handle is @NRA11. He's a co-host over on the Fantasy Assessment. He's actually a co-host on other shows to include that are all on the Going for Two live. How are you doing tonight?
Good, Steve. Thank you for having me on. Great to meet you face to face in the, as we would say, in the Zoom era now. But doing good today. Very excited to be on and talk NFC West, one that is near geographically to me and dear to my heart. And also, I am a new season ticket holder of the Rams, actually starting from this season, which is going to be very exciting.
Interesting. I was going to ask you when I asked you if you want to come on with me, you're like, I'll take the NFC West. I figured you had a team in there. I wasn't sure your favorite team, but I think you answered that. Where are you from?
Yeah. So I grew up in LA, then spent the last 8 years up in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And so as we were kind of chatting pre-show, that's where my love affair with this great game started, up in the Bay. So I went out to Levi's a couple times a year, then just moved back to Los Angeles in the last year. Allegiances, we will see, but it'll be hard to fake when I'm going to SoFi 9-10 times a year. So TBD, but we're here.
What's interesting about you, though, like, because you have so much football knowledge, I just assumed you've been watching football for years, playing fantasy football for years. Is that true?
Yeah, so it is not, but I'm sure if anyone's heard me yap on the pods or on my Twitter, you'll probably like, this guy has been day in, day out in the stat sheets. I only started playing fantasy football and truly even watching the NFL from 2021 itself. Before that, beyond a Super Bowl, maybe I caught like a playoff game here or there, but complete newbie to the sport. My own fault. I'm still making up for years of mistakes, but joined a fantasy league with my friends. Unfortunately, ended up Sacco in that inaugural year in league. But that, Sacco, last. If you've watched the league, you may get that reference. But finished last in a group of very close friends. So there's really no greater motivation than trying to get one over on your close boys. So,
oh my God. I have a 17-year-old league, and that's all we do is prank each other. We're the ones that. So you're preaching to the choir. It's so refreshing that you say that, though, because like, give me the younger person, especially with IDP. Give me the fresh mind versus the old dog that's been doing the same old tricks for 20, 30 years. I said this on other podcasts. I said this on IDP Plus, and they took it out. So maybe I hurt somebody's feelings. But when you have guys and, they're there with their arms crossed and they're like, oh, okay, Rahul, I've been playing fantasy since 2008. Well, my first response is you should win every time, right? Yeah. Why are you finishing 5th and 6th in your league every time if you've been playing that long? We're always here to grow, learn different takes. Mm-hmm. And it's cool to see the different ways this game comes across,
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point that you bring up about just the way people not just play the game, but really update their beliefs based on new information. And even outside of football, I have a heavy numbers and stats background from school. So, you're always kind of taught to challenge your beliefs, but to give you maybe a more specific example, in like the home leagues that people are in with their friends, people are drilled in, okay, you start RB, hammer them, hard and early.
Exactly.
I would say I maybe was more willing to try the zero RB, heavy wide receiver. That does seem to be the craze now, but maybe I was a little more eager and open to jumping into what people don't normally do because I haven't been doing that for years. It's all new to me. So, we learn the game itself changes, but also how we view the game, how we look at stats, it changes over the years. And I think you're only doing a disservice to yourself if you're not updating your beliefs on new information.
Not just football, but that's a way of life too. You know, you got to whatever. And again, the rules change so much. Like we just had this hip tackle rule. I don't even know how that's going to affect IDP.
Right.
I'm still trying to process it in general. But yeah, the game changes. We got to change with it. You're right with the running back, wide receiver thing, or PPR, half point, full point. I guess in IDP, there's like 3 or 4 major scorings. And most of the time, you would hear it the same way. Oh, we chase linebackers. Well, not really. If I'm playing in a league that's sack heavy and I'm getting 9 points per sack and only 1 point a tackle, I'm going to chase all those guys and hold my breath, and hopefully they get the almighty sacks. So it's the same thing on this end. Just, people want to hang on to what they, what they're accustomed to, if you will.
Exactly.
Rahul, I got a question for you too. You said you're on the fantasy assessment. You're on a couple going for 2 live shows. Is there anything you're working on? Anything you're doing right now?
Yeah. So like you brought up, the fantasy assessment, which airs 9:30 p.m. Eastern every other Thursday on Going for Two, hosted on Going for Two Live, the YouTube page, which I'm sure we'll have all the links available for you after. But I've been jumping on a few pods here and there, about to do a draft stream on day 1 of the draft next week. So definitely come by. And just got on a pod that drops on Sunday on iHeartRadio, just giving a preview of the NFL draft. So ramping my way up. I've got a few analytical fires in the kitchen that I'm working on. I really want to get into wins above replacement player analyses. That's kind of an area I've been consuming a lot of content in. I can see the applications, or I hopefully can see the applications in my own game and the content I put out to people. But a lot of little different lines in the metaphorical ocean. Not all of them have been are ready to draw up. I'm not good with fishing metaphors. What am I trying? But that's all to say, getting some good stuff in and hoping to do more as this offseason continues.
I like to, with my analysis, I like to take real life football or real life history and kind of combine it together. This division's kind of interesting to me. It was established way back in 1967. And, I was just doing the math. I was going through. Out of this division, there have been 18 Super Bowl appearances shared by all the teams in it. The 49ers had 8. The Rams had 5. The Seahawks had 3. The Cardinals had 1. Whether they won or lost, they were involved in it. So I love this division. And then they realigned it in 2002. But even when the NFL had significant changes, and even when the NFL grew, this division grew too. This NFL, whoever wins this division is usually in the thick of things. We know it as the 49ers now, but it's been seasonally, it's been the Seahawks from time to time. It's been the Rams. Of course, the Cardinals are kind of like the orphan child in this division. Yep. but since 2002, winning this division, you had Seahawks won it 9 times. 49ers won it 6. Rams won it 3. Cardinals won it 3. And even the Cardinals in that stretch, I was kind of ragging on them. They did have 1 Super Bowl run. So, like I said, this division is kind of exciting, whichever team pops out of it. Do you have any thoughts or what you think of when you think of the NFC West?
Yeah, no, I think the history that you laid out there is true to the present. I mean, if you look at the last 5 years, the NFC West has had a participant in the conference round in all of the last 5 years. They've had a Super Bowl participant in 4 of the last 5. Now, unfortunately, the division didn't take any of them home. But that is to say, year in, year out, you're getting some strong teams from the NFC West. Obviously, the Niners are kind of the powerhouse of the NFC at the moment, but the Rams reached the playoffs last year. Seahawks reached the playoffs the year before, and the Cardinals actually started 7-0, and they got dumped out in the first round. But they did reach the playoffs just 2 years ago. So it's a division that's competitive within, but also in the entire NFL too. They put up some good numbers.
On that 49ers note, though, I'd like to start there in my process with those guys. With the exception of Trey Lance trade that they did in 2021, that would normally destroy, that would cripple a franchise. They've been doing from top to bottom, just hitting on all their picks, to include Brock Purdy later on. I mean, just off the tip of my head, Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Greg Greenlaw, George Kittle, they just keep on cranking out players. Now, I will say this, my first thought, you're kind of alluding to it, they're coming off that 25-22 overtime loss to the Chiefs. They've lost 2 of them right now for the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. They keep knocking. They keep knocking on the door. They're going to have to get a Super Bowl win during this run to be considered one of these better teams. I was pulling numbers on the 49ers here, and you tell me what you think for, addressing team needs. But the 49ers total offense, they were second last year, 398.4. Rushing, they had 140.5. That ranked third. Passing, 257.9. That ranked fourth. Total defense, 303.9. That ranked eighth. Rushing, 89.7. That ranked third. And then passing defense was 214.2. That was 14th. And I think I said that. I meant to say rushing defense was ranked third. So they got rushing defense third, passing defense 14th, and then offensively rushing third, passing fourth. Pretty loaded team. What do you think this team needs as far as team needs goes?
Right. I mean, you kind of just laid it out there. This was one of the best teams in the NFL, top to bottom last year. Just to get into the stats a little bit more, and I'm sure we'll come back to this. If you especially look offensively from their efficiency stats, the Niners had the highest yards per passing attempt ever. They were number 1 in EPA per play and completion percentage over expected. Number 1 in run blocking and then rushing yards over expected. And then, we'll get into the detail, but Brandon Ayuk's a player I want to talk about a little more. He led a lot of wide receiver adjusted for no Tyreek Hill metrics. And that guy's a monster, but separation grade, catch point grade, yards after catch grade. He was second in yards per route run behind Tyreek. This is just, an offense that was humming at its very peak. So when you come back then to team needs, the one note that I could have brought up, especially on the offensive side of the ball, is their pass blocking grade was in the 20s, I think 22nd off the top of my head. So that's where I would look for them to be addressing in the first 2 rounds. I'd probably look Agreed. OT and then cornerback, I think was the second need that I had. Obviously, Talua Hufanga had a terrible ACL injury last year, but I'm sure we'll get into that more. But offensive tackle is what I think is their biggest need.
Nice that you said that. And for my audience on Spotify, audience that, the ones on YouTube will see it. I actually pulled up the PFF chart, and that's what me and Rahul are looking at right now. My number 1 was offensive line as well. I think they need to draft. Well, I should say this. They need to draft a tackle, maybe play him at right tackle this year, possibly to move him to left tackle. If you look at the PFF chart, they got guys like, I don't even know these guys, Colton McGivens, Matt Pryor, Jalen Moore, Alfred Grenade, Leroy Watson. They need to get somebody else to be the answer here. But more importantly, Trent Williams is 35 years old. I mean, again, Father Time is knocking on the door. And then you did say cornerback. I love that take because I was thinking defensive backs in general. Hufanga's coming off an ACL tear. Right. That's pretty scary, right? Starting safety, Tashawn Gibson, he's a free agent right now, at this time of us talking about this in April. And then the cornerbacks have been a rotational thing. And then I don't know what you did for your third, but I kind of, just to ride your coattails with the wide receiver thing, Brandon Ayuk is still asking to be traded, right? He's still so that could be scary if it's just Deebo and Kittle. Where are you going to get your points from? I do like, and I'm sure we'll get into this, Juan Jennings and all those guys too. But I think offensive line, wide receiver, defensive backs can probably need to be restocked.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you said there. And then just on the Ayuk point, because it is topical. Just earlier this week, and we're recording today on April 17th is when we're recording this. Earlier this week, it started with news that Brandon Ayuk had requested a trade. Later comes out that the agent himself denied those rumors, but there's definitely been a lot of noise all off season. Of course, Brandon Ayuk he scheduled to play on the 5th-year option, but angling for that trade just from a couple of years ago when kind of the same noise happened around Deebo Samuel. They only signed that extension after the NFL draft was completed. So I know they're, will the Jags toss pick 17 for Brandon Ayuk, or will the Bills go in and get Josh Allen, wide receiver? Hard to say, but I have a feeling they're going to play out the draft. If the value is there, they'll do it. But I think they want to retain Ayuk, and we'll see them give him the extension after the draft.
Yeah, I'm looking at this offensive, and I guess we'll kick it off with you. We can talk about quarterbacks, whatever. How do you feel about this offense?
Yeah. I mean, Brock Purdy really is, for me, one of the stories of the NFL. And then just, with how sports are, with how people, get into their tribes, like just the story of Mr. Irrelevant going to a Super Bowl.
Neat.
I don't think it gets celebrated as much as it should be. And, I'm not gonna get on anyone bashing another team, because I do that with the teams I support, the teams I don't support. But Brock Purdy, I mean, he's really met every challenge laid out for him. They had a bit of a blip in the middle of the year. I think heading into Purdy, there was a game that against the Vikings, they lost at home and kind of threw it away. And right after that, reports are coming out that Purdy suffered a concussion in the middle of the game. Really, he didn't miss a game. And then since that moment, he almost had a flawless campaign to end the year. So NFL-wise, they're going to rock with Purdy. They still have him on one of the most cost-efficient deals you can get at the position. So they're going to run with him. Fantasy-wise, I think, as a low-end QB1, I'd feel pretty confident. He's never going to give you the upside of a Jalen Hurts or a Lamar Jackson, who have that rushing upside. But in this offense, as efficient as it is, and with some of the stats that we talked about, it's going to be very explosive. So I think he'll be a useful fantasy contributor.
I had to pull the numbers. I think he finished QB 12 last year. I was like, really? Like, he was getting very underrated, and he probably won a lot of people their leagues.
Mm-hmm. Especially where you likely have to draft Purdy, if at all. I'd imagine he actually went undrafted in a majority of leagues last year. When we weren't sure if it's going to be Trey Lance, who's coming off an injury. But this year, I think once you get out of that top range of QBs, you start to realize that, when you're more in the 20 to 18 point range, there are a lot of guys that fit in here. So I think Purdy could sneak up and be a value just because the name brand doesn't match where he's going to end up fantasy-wise.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? And just think of the guys he outplaced, man. He outplayed players that you had to go up and trade for, like the Herberts and stuff like that of the world, I guess I'm going to come back over to the defensive line here real quick. The player you want here, it all starts with Nick Bosa. He was the former 2002 Defensive Player of the Year. Last year, a lot of people thought this was a down year. And I'm like, check again. The guy had 10.5 sacks. He had 35 QB hits. And a lot of leagues rule they have QB hits. If you get points for that, a point or two for QB hits, that was your guy. He kept getting to the quarterback. I think people were getting upset because he wasn't necessarily following through. But 10.5 is still a good year. Okay, he was a true menace on the field. Stat line, 52 combined tackles. 16 of those resulted in tackle for loss. I signed up for that every year. The reality is when you pulled the metrics, the pass win rush rate, the pressures, the hits, he's kind of the same player he's always been. It's just there's always a revolving door with this team, and I don't know what the deal is with ends. They can't seem to keep another end that complements Bosa. And I guess that'd be my second talking point when you're looking at defensive ends. I guess the team's second, third, and fourth ranked pressures on the edge, which was Chase Young, Randall Gregory, Clinton Farrell, they're all free agents now. They're all gone. So adding to this departure, you could also throw Kinlaw in there that's gone, and Eric Armstead that's gone. So there's a real head scratcher as far as where these points are going to come from the other side. But, PFF has identified a player, and I think I got him too, and I'll explain who that is. You see that Floyd character there? He's only graded a 58.7, but he's actually a better player than people think. Leonard Floyd stands out. He stands out as a strong sleeper to me this year. He's 31 years old. The hope is he can continue making pressures and getting to the quarterback, because when you got a guy like Bosa on that side, he's going to get double teamed every time. That's all you're asking me to do is rush. That's all he's got to do here. He's got 38.5 sacks over the last 4 years, and this could be a career year for him. So he's going to be replacing the one side of the edge. As far as the inside goes, we have two players I want to talk about here. There's a guy named Malik Collins. He came over in a trade from the Texans, so I feel like he's going to get use. Malik Collins just might be the replacement for Eric Armstead here. Collins had 5 sacks, 18 QB hits last year. The 49ers signed him as a 3-down player. The Texans didn't really use him like that. One thing about that, Rue, it's all about the 3 downs. You know, if you have a great player and I have an average player, and I'm playing 3 downs, you're only playing 1 down, then I'm gonna beat you 3 times the 1.
Right.
You know? So this guy here was only getting 59 to 72% of the snaps. The idea here, the 49ers are planning on using him as a 3-down player. So I'm expecting solid numbers out of him in 2023. Again, he had 5, 6, 18 QB hits. He proved that he could get to the passer. So I think that this is going to be one of those. Actually, 1 or 2 of these players is going to be a solid player. PFF has him graded as a solid 74.9. He's in the green, you know? So that could be a sleeper. Now, for the depth, they have a guy named Gross Matos. Not really special, 4.5 sacks, 10 QB hits. He historically lines up at DL. Look this early and often. The Panthers, he was on last year, they ran a 3-4 scheme. He was too small to play in a 3-4 scheme. And the 49ers run a 4-3 scheme, so he'll be more of a defensive end kind of rotator player. But not thinking a lot about him, just kind of interesting for these deeper leagues. I play in these sick 32-team leagues. That's a player I would look at, you know. And then the last defensive lineman here is Javon Hargrave. Most people know him as a solid blocker. He had 44 tackles last year, 7.5 sacks. That's really hard to do from the interior. It really is. Resulted in a Pro Bowl appearance for his second time in his career. He profiles to me as a very versatile player because the 49ers asked him to play that defensive tackle role, right? When he used to play earlier in his career with the Pittsburgh Steelers, they ran a 3-4, so he would get stuck playing a lot of nose tackle. So, again, those are your players to watch for. The 2 that I'm very curious about are Bosa and Hargrave already established. The 2 I'm curious about are Floyd and Collins. What says you? I'll move it back to you. Any thoughts on defense, or do you want to go straight to offense? What do you think?
I think I'll leave the majority of the defense for you. I mean, okay. I kind of mentioned this again before the show, but I'm learning a ton just sitting on the other side of this pod as someone, you know, who isn't too much of an IDP player. So well,
don't feel bad because you can get it all right in the offseason. One rookie draft comes and blows it all up. So, this is all speculative by all means, you know?
Yeah. Where I do want to pick up before we move to other offensive pieces is actually, weirdly enough, the backup QB for the 49ers. And that is none other than the pastronaut himself, Josh Dobbs, who, of course, had, you know, a glorious year, really, for what we expected, both on the Cardinals and then the Vikings, where the legend of the Dobbs really reached its peak. So why I do want to bring up Josh Dobbs, and this is something I've been doing a lot of thinking about in the offseason, is the value of the backup quarterback, especially in Dynasty redraft. It's not as applicable. Just, you know, not as many Superflex redraft leagues, but especially in Dynasty, when you consider the number of injuries at the QB position, when you consider some of the players who were starting at QB in week 17, I started Tyrod Taylor in a final that I was in, and he put up 18 plus points. And so just bringing it back to Josh Dobbs, I think that the value the value of a QB1 start in a week is far greater than what people really give, you know, attributed to, because winning a week or not winning a week really makes such a difference. And Josh Dobbs, why I want to highlight him is we saw him run with the ball a lot last year. We saw him rack up the rushing touchdowns. We obviously know how that impacts fantasy. Last piece, which is the first piece, this is one of the best offenses in the league. This is one of the most offenses in the league. So a backup QB in this spot, especially with the rushing upside, is one that I'd feel confident plugging in and playing. So if you can get him for free, I'd like to throw him. That's just kind of something I've been thinking about a lot this offseason, the value of getting that guy who you can plug in and get your 18 points from, your QB 12 finish from in any given week.
Yeah, I like Dobbs too. He's a winner. He's proven he's a rocket scientist too, I believe.
Yep.
You know, just there's a couple of games last year he was throwing the ball to. I'm cringing. I'm like, oh, that was almost an interception. That was almost an interception. So you just never know what you're going to get with him. He's very raw, I guess I would say. You know.
Yeah. And just and that is a fantasy football take in me coming out for sure. There are some questionable real NFL QB moments. But that was the QB. So thoughts on going to maybe the quickest positional review, and that's the RB of the San Francisco 49ers. And that is, of course, Christian McCaffrey, 101. Wasn't the 101 last year for the first time in a while because of the injury concerns.
Ain't that something?
Yeah. And, undoubtedly will be the 101 again this year. I mean, what can you say about the man that hasn't already been said so far? Led the league in touches and, obviously his work in the passing game, very efficient. This is a guy who just puts up monster weeks, week on week. Now when you think about him entering his, I want to say age 28 season, do they start to lift the workload a little bit? Niners love to run the ball. Do they get another guy in there to take 10 touches, 10 runs up the gut off him? That could happen. And I think that's what they would like. Unfortunately, Elijah Mitchell and Jordan Mason, the two guys behind him, had their own injury concerns and weren't really able to contribute on a weekly basis. Maybe I'd look for them to address in the draft. Not that this is going to take anything away from Christian McCaffrey, but maybe even fantasy managers would want that. You don't want Christian getting beat up week on week and then finally in week 17 and in the finals put up his worst performance this season because they took him off to rest him. That was a lot of yapping about nothing besides CMC is the first pick in redraft leagues. Absolute stud. And if you have him, you're feeling pretty good.
Heck yeah. Best honest take you can have. Get CMC and forget about it. Set it and forget it. Yeah. One of the few running backs out there that you can actually trust, week to week,
In
It's so refreshing. Yeah. I remember there were years, man, people were talking about get rid of it, trade him, because he's on the Panthers. He was getting hurt. Little guy getting hurt. I remember I can go back to say that people were kind of biased him because he was so tiny and he might get hurt. Well, guess what? He proved that theory wrong. He was a 3-down bell cow. And then all of a sudden, we had a couple injury years. Well, the Panthers won't protect this guy. Now he's with the 49ers who will love to run the ball. And they got enough in the bullpen to keep it refreshed. So, I'm kind of wanting to see more out of Elijah Mitchell. I'm not going to lie.
I've always liked Elijah Mitchell. I mean, he's not the best, but this is certainly an average NFL running back honestly, at the very worst, I would say. Guy just cannot stay healthy to save his life, unfortunately.
Right. Moving on to linebackers, though. My analysis is probably shorter than yours, believe it or not, with the running backs. There's a couple guys here, and really that's what the 49ers game plan is. They kind of go what they know. The two guys we know here are Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. Fred Warner is usually like a top 6 player, a linebacker off the board. Dre Greenlaw is in the top 12, 15 any given year. They usually lead the way with every major statistical category. They're always an elite option, always 3-down players. There's not much room to grow here, except for this year is going to be interesting. For the untrained eye, for a lot of people that don't know this, for the audience on Spotify that can't see my screen, I'm literally pulled up the PFF and I'm showing the chart to everyone. Dre Greenlaw got hurt in the Super Bowl. He suffered an injury, so we're looking at short-term options here to help out Fred Warner, who's an All-Pro player. They actually brought in, very sneaky under the radar, they brought in another All-Pro from 2021, that is, Devondre Campbell. He has been known for years historically as the linebacker vampire. because he usually gets in there and he'll steal a tackle or two from like the LB1, steal a tackle or two for LB1. Last year, he was the true LB1 for the Packers, and it just didn't pan out for him because he was getting hurt. Quay Walker was getting hurt. He was getting hurt. That's what happens when these guys get older. If you ever really want to dabble, Rahul, into like IDP, I wrote a dynasty article on age cliffs. Once these guys hit a certain age, they peak, and then once they get a little older, they decline. It's really interesting. So Devon Campbell, he's on the decline of his NFL career, but he can still replace Greenlaw for the time being, and he can play LB too. Most certainly, he's done that historically his career. Those are your three players in here. I'm going to add one more for depth. There's a guy I get really into the rookie season in the combine, just for the storytelling alone. But there's a guy named D Winters. He's on the back. He's on the depth here. I remember he had a 4.49 40-yard dash time. And I know people get all, they get all excited about 40 times. It really doesn't mean much for most positions. For linebackers, shuttles and speed does, because these guys are trying to keep up with. They're trying to be reactive to other positions. But at that combine, I remember his speed, and I remember, if this kid can get some significant snaps on the field, he hasn't yet. But I'm looking how these young linebackers and age cliffs work. Clearly, the best is yet to come. If I was in a big enough league, I would keep him, as a taxi or something like that. He is getting ready to be an unrestricted free agent, so time will tell if the team ever considers him the way I do. So I guess for the audience, consider that a speculative stash. But that's my take on linebackers. What says you about the offense?
Yeah, offense, and I like the way the way you've been integrating depth a little more smoothly than I have. So I'm gonna also, finish up my RB point with just a note about
some positions you can, other ones you're like, oh, let me get off this. You know what I mean?
No, and I just want to touch on the depth. I mean, everyone and their mother knows handcuff running backs have a lot of value. Whoever the 49ers running back is, even if he's not, the god that is CMC, is going to be valuable if they get that spot start. So, I'd keep abreast of the training camp news. Mitchell is the incumbent too, but we see the Niners rotate through these running backs quite a bit. So you might have to keep up with the comings and goings. Moving on to the next offensive position, let's get right to the wide receivers. Of course, The 49ers had, at least in half PPR, the wide receiver 9 and the wide receiver 14 on a points per game basis. That was Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, respectively. I mean, both of these guys are just so great because they win in such different ways. Ayuk, especially, who's quickly become one of my favorite players in the NFL, really, I think, has blossomed into the complete wide receiver. He had a few, I would say, weird years. He was in Shanahan's doghouse for a good part of 2021. Right after he came out, broke out as a rookie, then took a step back. And a lot of the talk there was Ayuk wasn't giving his all in the run game, more specifically, or, doing his utmost when he wasn't, the read on the play. That's where I've actually seen Ayuk step up. This doesn't count at all for fantasy stats, but when you see CMCs making that lung busting run to get open, and then Ayuk comes out of nowhere and blocks off the guy, that's not just what we noticed, but coaches especially noticed, and I think that's helped Ayuk grow his game. Coming back to, the active scoring fantasy points, like I said, Ayuk topped the league in PFF separation grade, his grade at the catch point, his grade with yards after the catch. Is funny when he's Deebo Samuel, his teammate. The thing that really held Brandon Ayuk back is he was only the 34th most targeted player in the NFL, averaging only 6.6 targets a game. I mean, on 75 catches, he put up 1,300 yards. This is not sustainable. It's not sustainable, but that's where, you might have to use a little more of qualitatively the eye test, all these statistics that we're providing for you. Ayuk is a very good player. The profile does lend itself to someone who could be boom bust, but then why don't we think a little positive? What happens if he gets a little bit more volume? What happens if Deebo Samuel, CMC, George Kittle, who we'll get onto, players with a little bit older with a history of niggling injury problems, what if they have to miss more than a game or two? I see the bull case really with Brandon Ayuk to take the step up and establish himself as a top receiver. It's going to be interesting seeing where he goes in drafts, because if he's priced as a wide receiver 1, that's where maybe I'll tend to take a little bit more of a safer approach. But if I can get him around wide receiver 16, pair him with a floor play like, an Amon-Ra St. Brown, who, is going to be consistent. Ayuk is the kind of player who can take your team to the next level.
Nice.
I like a lot about him. And we talked about the trade possibilities. There are a few landing spots that would make me feel worse about his prospects. But then you think about the thought of him going and then being that 10 targeted game alpha. I just think the upside is tremendous with this guy. Who
I like what you said with the analysis. We're getting our money's worth tonight, folks. This is some good analysis. With Ayuk, I got him anywhere between a 13th to 15th wide receiver. If you're getting him at the 16th, which means you're probably buying him at your ADP of a wide receiver 2, and you have a potential wide receiver 1 back end on your hands, that could be a game-winning move right there.
It's team construct. With these individual players, you need to consider the team that you're adding them to. So, what that Amon-Ra St. Brown, that guy who, any given Sunday, you're getting at least 12 half PPR points locked in. So that's where, Ayuk, maybe he gets less than 10. You're not as happy, but you have kind of the ability to absorb, his bust weeks with the reward of his boom weeks. So team construction, does matter where you pick him, but at the value that you could get him, I'd love to add him to really any team. Now, Deebo Samuel is a very interesting player who he finished as wide receiver 3 in 2021, then had a bit of a down year in 2022, back to his best. And a lot of the debate has been, Deebo, they started ramping up his carries, his rushing work. Would that subside with Christian McCaffrey entering the building? Instead, it just kind of opened up the game a little more. I mean, this team, they can really hurt you in such a variety of ways that allows someone like Deebo Samuel, who has a very low average depth of target, not really what you want to see from a fantasy point of view. This guy will take, a ball play to him on the line of scrimmage and take it all the way to the house. They just can win in so many different ways.
Looking at the defense side, I'm going to try to give you your money's worth here. I think PFF has these guys ranked a little bit higher than I think they are in real life. I feel like there's holes here, but great defenses can disguise what their weaknesses are in scheme. If you look at the 49ers and kind of research the kind of schemes that they run a traditional 4-man rush. They can do that because they have guys that are just going after the ball. But they run a traditional 4-man rush zone concept. So everybody's kind of behind and they're kind of cleaning up these holes, linebackers in coverage, what have you, that sort of thing, right? It's the 14th best passing defense, okay? This scheme allows them to kind of let these guys drop back in coverage, play their best games. So for these last 4 players, I'm going to kind of sort of highlight them and what they do well. But just a little food for thought here for the audience. When you have a team and you're trying to build a defense, the best way to build it is up the middle, i.e. defensive tackle, middle linebacker, strong safety. And if you can't do that, go strong front 4. Because if you got a pass rush coming, everything else breaks down. You can kind of hide guys in the backfield, and that's kind of what this team does pretty well when they got guys playing zone coverage or press. I'm going to start with the corner, Charvarius Ward. He is one of the best press corners in the whole entire league. For real, I had to pull up some stats previous seasons, but it goes all the way back. Ward's also distinguished him this year, and he had a career year. He had 5 interceptions, 23 pass breakups, and the guy made the Pro Bowl. So, to the untrained eye, sometimes stats are the key here, right? There's another guy. He plays nickel, but he can play outside. The guy's name is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Demoridor Lenoir, Lenoir. That's what we look for. This guy was a sneaky sleeper last year. He plays both sides. He's just 24 years old. I have him in a dynasty stash in a lot of places. For being a nickel, for being a sub in and out player, he had 3 interceptions and 10 pass breakups. There's another guy in the depth, Ambry Thomas. He plays outside a lot. He's one of those guys you can hide in zone because he plays decent zone coverage, not so much man. The story here is Tolona Hafunga. He did earn all-pro honors in 2022, but he tore his ACL in 2023. So I have serious question marks about him playing in 2024. We're going to have to see how that plays out because, like I said, doing these, that's what stinks. Doing these in April, we just don't know how it's going to pan out. But here's my sleeper. Everyone keep their eyes on. There's a second-year player, J-A-R. I can't say these names today. Brown, okay? J-I-A-Y-I-R Brown. Okay, he could be the next breakout player in this kind of scheme. Brown had an amazing interception, if you guys remember, in the Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes. But he's also a really good lay the wood down, hit, tackle kind of safety. He was one of, I'm going to say he was probably 3 or 4 in last year's draft class behind guys like Branch, Jordan Battle, Sidney Brown. He was right there with the best of them. So give him time. He could develop. Question for you. I see this team competing again, another Super Bowl run. What says you?
That's what I see. That's what the expectation is, to just take it, maybe even out of a football, maybe even out of a sporting lens. For me, the biggest question I'd ask is a team that's been on a 4-year run of 2 Super Bowl losses, 2 conference losses, a lot of devastating errors in those games. And, with the Super Bowl last year, I actually would want to question Shanahan's kind of his not, throttling it down their throat with CMC when the Niners had the lead. So the question that I would ask is, can this team really just raise themselves to that level again after a brutal 4 years? For me, that's the biggest concern, is mentality wise, are they equipped for another grueling season? Because I think otherwise, on paper, with the talent, the Super Bowl should be the expectation.
Right. And then moving on to our second team, I got as the Los Angeles Rams. Credit to this coaching staff, like for real. After a poor 2022, I actually expect this team to fold. A lot of experts did. They didn't. They actually went 10-7. They lost in the playoffs to the Lions, 24-23. This team keeps giving away first-round draft picks. I think this is the 6th year in a row they haven't had one, and they just keep hitting. They keep hitting offense, defense with late-round picks. It's like going in a bag of M&Ms. They always find that orange M&M or that red one, whatever the one everybody covets. They're really good. And you know what's crazy? Here's the numbers on them. They're actually quite good considering the no-name defense they had. But for total offense, 359.3, they ranked 7th. For rushing, 120.3, they ranked 11th. For passing, they were 239, that ranked 10th. Total defense, 337.9, they ranked 20th. Rushing defense, 106.8, that was 12th. And in the passing defense, 231.20th. Again, roundabout, they made the playoffs last year. It could have went either way with some of these games. They're very well coached. That's my first thought about this team. Question for you: What are your thoughts about this team, and what do you think the team needs are?
Yeah. I mean, a very fun team. I think you hit the nail on the head. The expectations heading into last year were extremely low, to put it lightly, and especially then going into the season with Cooper Kupp, an injury-riddled summer, and then we learned he's going to start the season on the PUP. So people were like, are we drafting Van Jefferson this year? Is that what we're doing? But no, they came out in that first game against the Seahawks, actually, and then just blew them away. And that was them and Mike McDaniels, the Dolphins kind of were the first teams to really adopt that like cheat motion where they set their speedy receiver in motion and have them explode off the line. Obviously, the Dolphins were doing this with Tyreek Hill. That's a little bit different than Tutu Atwell doing it, but
thank you.
Do it very effectively. They did. And that really just speaks to like you said, the coaching of this team. I mean, Sean McVay, an offensive savant, if you will. No one really expected this team to do as well as they did, and I'm excited to see them again this year. Maybe jumping a little bit ahead of schedule, but what I loved about the work they did offensively, big defensive departure to talk about, but offensively, they went heavy and hard on the offensive line, signed 2 guards, and I really like what that means for Matt Stafford, older QB with a few injuries popping up, want to keep him protected. And then the running game, Kyren Williams, obviously, we're going to get into him, but that only bodes well for the young running back.
Yeah, I was thinking team needs. I was thinking offensive line a little bit. For the audience at home that can't see the screen, and the audience on Spotify, we're on YouTube and we're on the channel here. We just pulled up PFF. If you look at this screen, I mean, we're looking pretty strong on the right side. You got a guy named Dotson, 84.4 at right guard, Havenstein, 79.8. Look to the left. Look at all that yellow. We got a 60.5 at center. We got a 60 at left guard, 66.6 at left tackle. We got some guys over here that maybe could be had. So I think a little bit of an upgrade on offensive line couldn't hurt. So I put them in there as one of my top 3, probably my 3. And then I'll go back. I'll go backwards. My number 2 was defensive line because, again, they just lost Aaron Donald. Mm-hmm. But not only that, they had a guy named Jonah Williams who was in the mix. He left in free agency. And then my number 1 glaring need, and I kind of showed you in the stats, they're ranked 7th, 11th, 10th, 20th, 12th. Passing defense, they're ranked 20th. So I'm looking at that defensive backfield, and I'm thinking some good upgrades can happen. They're bringing a guy in, Cameron Curl, which most of us know in IDP as a tackle-heavy guy. And this is what's funny, Rahul, when you change the settings, when you go to big 3 scoring, which is more impact plays, coverage, pass deflections, Cameron Curl's like a top 35 player. You put him in tackle heavy, he's a top 10. You see how ridiculous IDP could change at any given time. So context matters, settings matter, scoring matters. But those are my 3 needs: defensive back, defensive line, offensive line. Did you see it any other way?
I think you pretty much got what I'd say, and I think especially at 19, where they're sitting in the draft right now, with kind of how mock drafts have been shaping up and kind of the offensive focus of this class. Obviously, a deep tackle and wide receiver class. Tackle is a need, but I see them aiming for their Aaron Donald replacement at 19 itself. Names like Laiatu Latu, who's a very good player, but has a lot of medical concerns. You probably will know a little bit more about him than I do, but I think just the way I see the value of defensive players falling in the first round of this draft, I think they're going to be very happy with whoever they go for at 19.
So with Latu, on that note, though, he was told he's never going to be able to play again. He had a career-ending injury. UCLA's the only team took a chance on him, and he blew it up. I mean, he didn't really care too much about the combine. His tape is his combine. He's going as a top 3 defensive lineman in this draft. If you guys get him later, the other 2 come off, that's a steal. He led everybody, PFF, pass rush, all of that stuff, what have you. Question on this offense, what sticks out to you? How do you like this quarterback room?
Yeah, no, starting just from Matt Stafford, I think NFL-wise, he was easily a top 10, perhaps at times in the year, top 5 quarterback with the way he was slinging that ball. Of course, this is the kind of the scheme that lets your quarterback be the guy, but Matt Stafford was doing what he's been doing for years, and maybe people questioned after a down 2022, but he also had a lot of injuries. So Stafford, again, it's going to depend. Sorry. I don't know if an ad started playing in my head, but Stafford, just getting back to him, it's a guy that's going to depend on your league settings. For most of your 1 quarterback leagues, I'm probably not looking to get him too early. This is someone that in 2 quarterback leagues, if you're plugging him in as your QB2, if you're searching for a cheap QB2, I'd love to get Stafford on my team, because just with the way this offense functions, you're going to be able to put up a respectable floor. Unfortunately, and fortunately for someone else on the team, they also scored quite a lot of rushing touchdowns last year, and that kind of took away from Stafford's upside. But I think it's a safe floor play. QB 16 to 18, someone in a bye week. Very happy with Stafford. And not to make my mistake of last time, I'm going to touch on the depth just because that is Jimmy G, who is now a Los Angeles Ram. Again, a QB2, someone who's going to be very, very cheap in your dynasty leagues, perhaps even on waivers after how his Las Vegas spell went. It's a guy of Stafford. He's been banged up in the last few years. You can get Jimmy G to come in there and give you, 250 and 2 on any given week. So again, someone to just keep your mind out. If you can toss like a late fourth, $10 in fab, what have you, this could be a guy that'll come in and give you some starts.
Heck yeah. Now on the defensive line, we already kind of ragged this a little bit. I'm going to continue to bag it a little bit more. The core lost Aaron Donald. That's 8 sacks gone. On top of that, the numbers don't add up well for this defensive line. Here's something. The Rams actually allowed 4.1 yards per carry to running backs. That ranked 16th in the league. They also gave up 16 again in total pressure rate. They must like that number, 16, right? The edge rushers posted the league's worst pressure rate at 15.6. So I think you're on to something about them trying to go after Latu. I kind of like that take. And they also managed the 3rd fewest total pressures at that position. So I think that needs to be overran. There is a couple players worth looking at here. There's a guy named Kobe Turner. He was just a 3rd-round pick last year. Kobe Turner, just a 3rd-round pick. Guess what? He led the team with 9 sacks. He had 1 more sack than Donald. And he returns after this impressive rookie campaign. So he's on year 2 now. His pressure rate is a bit lower than you'd want. It's 10.7. I go on ESPN.com. I pull up pressure rates because this stuff, like I said, context matters. He did have 9 stops in the running game, so he's pretty good. There's 2 other players over here. Goodish, I guess, if that's a word. Good, but not great. There's a guy named Deshaun Johnson. He's a depth piece for the moment, but he's a decent pass rusher when he gets an opportunity. There's another guy named Bobby Brown. No, he's not Whitney Houston's husband. This Bobby Brown had limited playing time. He had 13 games. He's only played 13 games over 32 games over the last 3 years. So he has an injury concern. He is good at, stopping the run. So I think both those guys are going to be depth pieces. And I think we're going to see another edge, another defensive lineman in the draft. Thoughts here, or do you want to go back to offense?
Yeah. Even for my limited knowledge of the other side of the ball, Kobe Turner is someone who really, really stood out, both when you come from where the expectations for that defense were and then how they ended up performing. Kobe Turner was a candidate for Defensive Rookie of the Year with his play. So,
it's 83.2 grade PFF. Yeah. That's pretty darn good.
And we'll be switching back to the offense in a sec, but just their ability to hit on those later picks. Of course, Kobe Turner, you said 3rd rounder. The running back, we're going to get into a 5th rounder, and then of course Prince Puka himself was a 5th rounder. But just their ability to make the most of limited assets, also as set this team up well. But yeah, switching over to the backfield, Kyren Williams, of course, was the waiver wire pick of all waiver wire pickups, ending at, and I want to make sure I get the points per game ranking right. He ended up as the RB2 in half PPR with 19.9 points per game. Let me take you to 2022 when Kyren Williams went through the combine. This guy came in at 5'9", 190, ran a 4.55. Everyone was like, all right, he's off our boards. We don't care about Kyren Williams. Really, the only thing that in his profile kind of kept him in my mind was that he came out of college and his big calling card was his pass blocking ability. Now, as my kind of analysis has evolved over the years, I kind of see where that comes in, especially with playing time. And then you saw Kyren Williams do it this year. But heading into week 1, Thursday night football of 2022, Rams versus the Bills, the first game, Adam Schefter, right before kickoff, sends out this tweet: watch out for Kyren Williams. This is a guy that the coaching staff really, really like. I'm paraphrasing here, but you look at Adam Schefter tweeted this. first play of the 2022 season, kickoff return to Kyren Williams. He gets injured. He's out for months. So that's kind of how the year started, and he never really kicked on. Cam Akers had that nice run to end the year. Heading into 2023, we still saw Cam Akers, at least being drafted as the RB1. Training camp noise was there with Kyren. And the younger running back did get got half the work heading into week 1. Cam Akers got cut week 2, and then kind of they let loose the dogs of war. And really what stood out for me for Kyren was the workload at that size. He wasn't the most efficient, though he was good. But this guy just kept getting fed the ball. And in the end of the day, volume is king in fantasy football. And this guy who had all the volume. I just want to leave this point with one note of Kyren Williams. He faced a loaded box, which is 8+ defenders in the box, in less than 5% of his snaps. This is the lowest of any running back with over 90 attempts last year. And to give you a little more context, CMC and Henry, they faced a loaded box by this metric over 35% of the time. So Kyren Williams is benefiting a lot from the threat of the passing game of, led by Messrs. Stafford, McVay, led by, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. It creates the kind of offensive system where a running back is going to thrive because they're so worried about the threat. For all these reasons and for the lack of free agent activity, I feel really good about Kyren Williams heading to next year.
That was going to be my question for you because Kyren Williams, fantasy perspective, he's going in first rounds right now. And I'm just not sure if if it's the system or if it's just what have you. But are you a Kyren Williams guy this year?
I think I will be. And of course, we do have the draft to go. But one thing that I'm struggling to reconcile is if you've been on the dynasty space, the Twitter sphere, so have you. People are down on the running back class. No one seems to rate these running backs. But then there are some of these existing running backs that people are saying, hey, sell. They're not going to hold their value. They're going to get competition. Is this competition going to be good enough to take significant work away from Kyren Williams? Maybe. Maybe if that amounts to 5 to 10 carries a game, could that have an impact on one of the busiest running backs? Sure. But I feel confident in projecting Kyren Williams as a strong RB1 for next year for all the reasons we just discussed.
And like you said, volume's key. You know what I mean? So when you have a guy getting that much volume, it's kind of too big to fail. Do you know what I mean? Speaking of volume, that's where I kind of want to go here with IDP. When you get a linebacker and he's a 3-down player and he's that good and he's with the tackles and he's there all day long, that spells a recipe for success. Ernest Jones is one of those guys. He's in a system, commonly the Rams scheme. They usually have one set linebacker. Sometimes they'll put 2 on the field, but Ernest Jones is a 3-down player. He's going to always be on the field. It's not necessarily a talented group, but Ernest Jones leads this group with 140 tackles. You'll be hard-pressed to find a better player. Usually in dynasty leagues, he goes a little bit higher in redrafts, but consider him in the top 5. He's a premier younger player. So that's your player right there. Grades well, everything. There's a couple sneaky players in here I want to talk about. I guess you'd call him a DL linebacker kind of hybrid. There's a guy named Michael Hoyt. He had 11.8% pressure rate. And he's got another guy next to him, Byron Young. Together, those guys contributed 14 sacks out of nowhere. And they rotated in and out of lineups as the linebacker, DL linebacker edge here. There's a couple decent names: Christian Rosenboom, Nick Hampton, Zach Van Falkenburg. Try to say that name again. Zach Van Falkenburg. That sounds like an 80s band name, right?
I was going to say it sounds like something out of Space Fox or something.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. That's a good one too. Yeah. This team keeps grinding out players that have no pedigree, no surface, and are always late round picks. So again, hats off to this coaching. Hats off to this organization. Usually you'll have one or the other. You'll have one good coach or a bad organization manager, or you'll have a great GM. You have a terrible coach. This one seems they got it all figured out. So even regardless of the names, they could have Bon Jovi on the field. They have Steve Perry in the field. I don't care who they got in the field. They're going to be in games most weeks, and that's usually the way this team is. They're very punchy. But that's all I have for linebackers. What says you about the wide receivers?
Yeah. If I could actually ask a question, just because you're talking about coaches and you're getting into scheme, how do you, if you've analyzed this yet, how do you see the impact of Raheem Morris, the former defensive coordinator, now the head coach of the Falcons? How do you see his departure affecting this team?
So again, it's so early to tell. It really is. I usually don't start like ranking and start going to town on until like maybe like the second game of the preseason, because we just don't know what we have right now. But, you know, we have pieces. If you just look at PFF, it kind of tells it, right? We have a guy right now that's really good on the edge. We got Turner. We got a guy that's really good on the tackle, Brown. We got some good edges here. We got a decent enough corner. So I can see these guys being like the serious threats and then everybody else kind of hiding around them a little bit. I'm expecting a 3-4 scheme as it stands right now. And I'm expecting these safeties to be more of a target, like an attacking kind of defense. Because if they sit back in coverage, both Cameron Curl and Yeast, which I'll get into, I think they're going to get destroyed back there. So it's always easier, you want to have a good defense, have a strong offense and attack. So that's what I see out of this. I don't and again, Morris it was a top 20 defense. I mean, there's always room to improve, but they're going to have to get more pieces around until we could effectively, intelligently answer that, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just looking at the coaching changes before this and wanted to bring it up. But
now the other two teams, Seattle and Cardinals, they got some serious issues. At least they have some kind of competency, but I think the defense is holding those teams back, and we'll get into that in a moment. But
if we're ready, then let's switch on over to wide receiver, where of course, you know, another one of these waiver wire darlings, the guys who just won your leagues, Puka Nacua, 5th round rookie, all the way to win it or getting the most receiving yards and receptions by a rookie wide receiver ever. I mean, phenomenal job really by the Rams scouting department. And there was a clip of Les Snead, who is the GM for the Rams, talking about Puka. And something that stood out to them and then stood out to me is they were talking about how Puka, his 40 time was, I think, the 4.7s, pretty atrocious. But when they looked at then his game speed, he was amongst the fastest players in the class. And that's something that stood out to them as, hey, there's something going on here. This player is being undervalued for the wrong reason. I really like that anecdote. It's kind of gave me a bit of insight about how these teams are dealing or learning from these newer advancements. It was kind of brought up to me again when Keon Coleman, who ran a 4.6 at the combine, but then when he was going through the gauntlet, he was actually the fastest receiver at the combine. So the teams really have to get a little bit creative to unearth gems, which the Rams certainly did with Puka Nacua as he performed, ending up as a wide receiver 7. I mean, now in Dynasty, he's a top 5, top 6 wide receiver. I don't see why.
They have a good core. Like Nakua is 90.2 grade on PFF. Coop is 71.5 on PFF. Robinson is 70. If you were to ask me without telling me those numbers, I would have probably had it the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, just both the personnel in the room and obviously the system is just so bountiful, if you will, for pass catchers. And I don't really see that changing just from the offense. I expect them to sling the ball early and often. Now, the thing with Nacua is you're also probably going to have to draft him at a ceiling. And is there a case for Cooper Kupp getting a little bit more of that work back now, with hopefully a healthy offseason, offseason behind him. Cooper Kupp could end up being the value to target, but I think both of them are going to be locked in starters in really most formats. I like that you brought up Demarcus Robinson because he had quietly a very productive run to end the year. I had this buddy with one of the worst dynasty rosters in one of those Sacco playoffs and picked up Demarcus Robinson off the waivers for week 17. He put up, I think he put up a 20-point game against the Saints, if I'm remembering correctly. But that's just all to say the receivers on this team, the pass catchers, are going to have a prominent role. Could I see them draft a wide receiver just with a talent that's going to be available later in this class? I could see them add a third piece, maybe not immediately productive, but someone to keep your eye on, especially in the dynasty leagues.
So Demarcus Robinson, just because this is the place to throw it all out here, you want to go deep. We're going from week 12 to week 13 to 18 here. So let's go week 13, 5 targets. Yeah. Okay. Week 14, 10 targets. Week 15, 3 targets. Week 16, 6 targets. 17, 10. And then 18. But yeah, and then within weeks 13 to 16, because I wrote a waiver article on this guy, he had a touchdown each week. Mm-hmm. So like I said, once he's on. He's a sneaky guy to pick up in like deeper leagues. I'm in a 32 team now. I'm waiting to draft him. So I don't want this article to get out too quick. It's podcast. But then I have another one that I'm in. But yeah, he's one of those players that will produce in this kind of offense. And I guess it's because everybody else is running those short ends and he's going deep. So
yes.
You can get it to him.
Exactly. And that's something that specific receiving role, they kind of toyed with. Van Jefferson was there for a few years. He had a productive 2021. Tutu Atwell kind of started the year as a deeper threat. And then Demarcus Robinson took over the role to end the year. Whoever it is, even if it's a new receiver come in, there is sneaky flex appeal, especially if you're in a deeper league.
So moving on to defensive backs, though, I have quite a few major concerns here. The unit finished 20th against passing yards, and they finished 22nd against touchdowns. The guy who leads this unit with 94 tackles, his name is Jordan Fuller. He actually left in free agency to go play for the Panthers. So there's some major question marks here, and actually at corner too. There's an overhaul with 3 starters. We're going to start with Tre'Davious White. Excuse me. He's coming over from the Bills. Some people know that name in IDP. He used to be one of the top cornerbacks. He grades right now as a 70, so they're getting him kind of at the lowest point of his career. The reason being is he's coming off a lot of injuries. He's had injury concerns on and off the field. So we have questions. We're not even sure if he's a top shadow corner anymore. Another free agent they brought in I thought was interesting. He used to play for the Rams. This is his second tour. He's coming from the Jaguars. His name is Darius Williams. Darius Williams was a waiver wire discussion all last year. He had excellent true coverage play. When quarterbacks targeted him, their QB rating dropped all the way to 63.9. So he's an excellent coverage guy. We have concerns with White. We don't know what we're going to have. I alluded to it earlier on the show. Cameron Curl's more of a tackler. He's less of a coverage guy, but it's okay. They have a coverage guy. So they got a little bit of everything in this bag, okay? They got a guy named Russ Yeast starting. Yes, that's a name, Russ Yeast. If you ever want to have a fun game with your friends, a fun drinking game, name some of these Rams defensive players: Falkenberg, Hummel, Yeast, Rosenboom, Hoyt, and just make up a name or two and see if your friends can guess who the fake player is. Mm-hmm. But Russ Yeast actually led in snaps as far as all the safeties go. He pencils in as a starter. Problem what I have with him is he's hot and cold, and PFF confirms it. He's outside the top 100 at his position. So there you go with that. There's a sneaky player in here named Quentin Lake. Some of my old school audience may know that name Lake because he's the son of former Steelers great Carnell Lake. He provides good depth. He's a natural, true sleeper. He can play both positions, corner or safety, and he might work good, in the slot as well. I really don't know with this team. It's always a scrappy underdog team, and that's what scares me about scrappy underdog teams. You can see this team in the mix making the playoffs. You can see his team at 500. I really don't know, but I wouldn't count them out. What says you about the Rams?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think if I had to say NFL wise, I'd honestly expect them to kind of finish where they did last year. Make the playoffs and then, fight a bit and then probably get dumped down the first round, just because I think, especially on the defensive side of the ball, there are a lot of pieces that needs to be added. What I will say, though, is I think the Rams are a guarantee for fantasy points. Of course, all the weapons that we talked about. But, when I hear a team doesn't have the best defense, that only makes me more excited from an offensive point of view, because this is a team with a lot of firepower. They're going to go up big. The opponents are going to have to try and go up big, which only leads to more opportunities for your Pukas and your Kyrens and what have you. So fantasy-wise, I think a lock to be chock full of producers.
Moving on to our next two teams, I'm going to be real with you. I'm not that excited. You have a little bit more fun to talk with these offenses. These defenses kind of kill me. We're going to talk about the Seattle Seahawks next, and the numbers are going to tell you everything you need to know here, okay? Total offense, 322.9, that ranked 21st. Rushing, 92.9, that ranked 28th. Passing, 230, that ranked 14th. Now for some garbage stats here. Total defense, 374.4, they ranked 30th. Passing, rushing defense, 138.4, they ranked 31st. Passing defense, 233 even, that's 21st, so they're a little bit better, okay? Now, when we look at these numbers here, the defense is what kills me, okay? They let teams fail in every major statistical category. I just gave you the big ones. They allowed 8.4 first downs per game. You're not going to win many games if the other team is trickling down the field every play and a half. You know what I mean?
Right.
They stood at 6-3, but then they just crashed at 2-5. I think that's the second season they're doing that. If you were to ask me team needs, for the most part, I'm going to probably tell you defense. But I wanted to be a little more creative, a little bit more of a spin. So I'll tell you the three that I had. I had an offensive line. I definitely say linebacker, and I definitely say tight end. What says you about team needs or this team in general?
Yeah, I mean, just approaching from the offensive side of the ball, I think offensive line is really the biggest need on that side of the ball. I wouldn't call tight end as a real primary need at the. Not every team, features a tight end that much. Of course, now they're getting the former Ravens defensive coordinator. We know what the Ravens, not necessarily Mike McDonald, but the Ravens did with tight ends. So perhaps there's something there. But I think offensive line could be an option with where they're
especially
sitting in the draft.
At center and guard. Like, that makes me nervous in there.
Quick story, but I actually knew personally a lineman who played for the Seahawks last year, is engaged to one of my friends. He now is on the Bears. He's a third or fourth choice lineman, but still Jake Curran, if you're familiar.
Oh, yeah, I know that name. No kidding. Yeah. Small world, huh?
Yeah. Engaged to one of my high school friends. So wish both of them, Jake and Alex, best of luck if you're somehow listening to this. But yeah, especially where they're sitting at 16 with, you'd probably expect your Joe Alts, maybe Fautanu is the name that I see mocked there a lot, but let's say call it OT4 to the Seahawks there, or as you've been bringing up, pretty much anyone and everyone on the defense might, be checking over their shoulders, someone coming in. But yeah, OT and then defense are kind of the team needs for me.
Yeah, a lot of defense. And the reason I say tight end, I mean, who they got there? Look at it. I mean, geez. Like,
no, it's interesting. Like, yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but
Farrah Brown, Brady Russell, none of those guys scare me at all. You better be blocking because they don't have guards and centers.
The interesting thing for me is they actually lost two tight ends who played a decent amount of snaps, in Colby Parkinson to the Rams and then Will Disley to the Chargers, leaving Noah Fant alone. Farrah Brown is had some moments, but Noah Fant, a first round pick 5 years ago, came along as kind of a throw in piece in the Russell Wilson trade. Now he's in this room by himself. If you want to take a swing, I don't mind honestly looking at Fant as that cheap option with upside, just because he does have maybe more prospect pedigree at this point, but he has that pedigree. Fant, when he's been on the field, is, I've always kind of looked down on his kind of his grit, his power. He doesn't really break the tackles that you want your tight end to be breaking. But when you're then looking at this team, they've kind of got that the big three of the wide receivers, and that's where I expect most of the passing volume to go. Anyway, they could add maybe a blocking tight end to help them out, I would say.
What do you think of this quarterback room? That's what I wanted to pick your brain with.
Yeah. Of course, Geno Smith. Someone he finally he never wrote back to the haters, and maybe they came for him a bit last year.
It's a great story, though.
Again, a great story. But really, where I actually want to start for the Seahawks before we talk about the quarterbacks is the addition of Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, into the building. So Grubb was the OC of the Washington Huskies, who obviously got to the college football playoff finals. Just want to give a few baseline statistics, which will kind of paint the picture of what kind of scheme they played. If you didn't watch, they were first in passing yards per game in 2022, second in total offense. Followed it up with second in passing yards per game in 2023, 12th in total offense. This is a team that is going to sling the ball and sling it deep, which, coming back to the quarterback, Geno Smith, this is what he excelled at in breakout campaign in year 10 or whatever, but his true breakout campaign in 2022, Geno was one of the best deep ball passers in the league. So I actually think this is a kind of a marriage that is going to work well and see Geno recapture some of that luster that we saw. Again, kind of like the quarterbacks we've talked about today. None of them have that rushing upside. So again, Geno is not someone I'm going to be targeting aggressively, but as a backup, as a best ball option, as a QB2 option, there's, I think, a lot of value to be had with Geno Smith.
So you mentioned it. Mike McDonald's coming over from the Ravens. One thing he does is he gets a defensive line humming. He gets it looking right. So I'm kind of excited about some of these defensive linemen, some of these edge players. But for right now, this is what we have on the old depth chart here. We're going to start with Leonard Williams. Leonard Williams came over last season, like halfway through. He played 9 games. He finished second on this team with 9 tackles for loss and 4 sacks last season. Jared Reed also returned for his second stint with the team, and he finished second in sacks with 7. So those two guys were kind of rotating in, tackles for loss, sack guys, whatever. We have a couple other players here. We had Draymond Jones, who had a solid season with the team. He had 4.5 sacks and 8 run stops. So he was pretty good. He got injured, I think, halfway through, but he pencils in as a starter for me. And then I think on the bench, you have a guy named Jonathan Hatkins. He's a depth player. He's known as a run stuffer. But, that's the kind of players that Michael Morris actually looks at, is excited about, I'll save some of these guys for linebackers, but a guy who plays defensive line edge is Boye Mafe. He's known as a pass rusher. He got 9 sacks last season. If you guys want to get bored, look at my tweets. All last year I was tweeting this guy up. Him and the other edge, Nwosu, they were a positive force, each respectively at different times of the season. He actually went to IR. But last season, Nwosu, he only had 2 sacks in 6 games. So we're talking 2 years ago for him when he had his uptick. But his injury led to more playing time for other guys like Mafe and another guy named Darrell Taylor and another hybrid named Darrell Hall with 5.5 sacks. So I see the 3 or 4 players up front coming out of those 5 players, probably in some sort of rotation.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to see, and we'll get back onto this, but what Mike McDonald brings to this team. I think had some of the most interesting scheme last year with his work with the Ravens, which is, especially in the regular season, one of the most dominant defenses. So great addition. Another big coaching change. Just a quick tidbit that I actually just read today before we jumped on the show is Mike McDonald. One of the first things he did was take down pictures and murals of Pete Carroll and then other legends and great players from the last few years from inside the building.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, I just came out. I was just reading this, which it's always interesting being that first guy after, a major coaching change. So you want to make a name for yourself, and maybe that's just more of a, hey, this is, we're gonna write our own legacy here. We'll see how that all mentality plays out, but at least from a pure coaching standpoint, I'd be excited for this defense. I just also want to pick up on the Leonard Williams bit that you brought up, not necessarily from the defensive side, but from like a team point of view. At 6-3, I think maybe 5-2 or something heading into their bye, heading into the trade deadline, made that trade to give away their second round pick for Leonard Williams. Mm-hmm. In some corners, there was talk, okay, this team is ready to go win. And obviously they then crashed out, didn't make the playoffs. But that was just like a point where, the season was misjudged, if you would call it that. Yeah.
It looks like the Rams were the overachievers and the Seahawks were the underachievers here,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep. So then going back over to the offensive side, and we're starting with the backfield, Kenneth Walker really has been one of my favorite players to watch over the last 2 years. He's very confusing as a player, because there's sometimes where you see him and you think this is the best guy I've ever seen running the damn ball. Just the way he moves and, is able to burst. He's so electric. But one thing about Kenneth Walker is play to play, the consistency is just not there. And maybe a lot of this is on the offensive line play, which at times last season was really poor, but he gets stuffed behind the line of the scrimmage more than the average running back. And so I think that was a lot of the thinking with bringing in Zach Charbonnet as a second round pick last year, a bigger bodied back to maybe give that down to down consistency. Then when you actually, compare the two on the field, I think it was pretty clear Kenneth Walker should be not even just 1A. This is 1 and 2 kind of situation. It'll be interesting to see if Charbonnet works a little bit more under this new coaching regime, just because if you're around, again, the Twitter sphere last year, there's a lot of negativity around Ken Walker, where Charbonnet is going to be not just the big back to get the rushing touchdowns. He's also the pass catching back to take away those targets from Ken Walker. I don't know how that's going to end up this year. And I'm curious.
I was going to ask you that too. Who do you like better? You like Walker? Because I have some friends that are on the Charb camp, and I have other ones that are on the Walker camp. Mm-hmm. Who's your guy here?
For me, Ken Walker is the better back. He is the guy. Mm-hmm. Now, when you come to fantasy football, does 15 attempts a game and maybe a goal line attempt or two, is that going to be a difference maker? I don't know. I think the ceiling is unfortunately a little bit capped with Ken Walker because of the presence of Charbonnet taking some work, but also Walker just does not have the passing game upside. He doesn't have that consistency from play to play, which might get him taken out on the goal line. So, if you're looking for an RB2, I'd feel pretty good penciling in there. I think the chance to be an RB1 is past Kenneth Walker by a little bit, whether his own fault or, how it just played out.
Yeah. Looking at linebacker, and you would think this is a team need or a weakness, losing both Bobby Wagner and losing both Brooks and Wagner, mind you. Now, here's the thing. I was so proud of this. I tweeted this the other day, so if anybody was looking at my tweet, you really think those guys are missed? Let's look again. Let's look to the untrained eye. Let's look at the stats here, okay? This linebacker group missed tackles 14.2%. That ranked 31st last year. Rushing yards per carry, 4.6 they gave up. That ranked 27th. After contact, after that, they gave up another 3.1 yards. So that's ranked 30th. And in total defense overall in the rushing department, I already said it, that ranked 31st. So if you're really missing Wagner and Brooks fans, think again. I'll probably get drugged for saying that because they're fan favorites. But again, this team was not good where they needed to be. They got rid of those guys. They're bringing in some journeyman veterans. But there's some interesting notes here. Jerome Baker comes in. He was decent with the Dolphins. I have friends of mine that love that guy. PFF and me kind of agree. He's kind of a guy at this point. He's a jag.
Just a guy.
We're going to move up. Yeah, he's in the void. He'll fill in. He's okay. Okay, nothing wrong with him. I'm kind of interested in Tyrell Dotson. He graded as a 90.2 last year per PFF. He should excel with an opportunity. Like I told you at the beginning of the podcast, linebackers, it's all about, do they get that 3-down opportunity to get volume? This is a guy that's going to get both. So that's a sleeper for me right there. These are going to be the two in the rotation with, I said earlier, the Mafe and Nwosu's, somebody on the edge coming down so they have their blitz. But those are going to be your two major guys here. Not really a whole lot more worth mentioning. Those are going to be your players for that. What says you about this offense, particularly the wide receivers? I'm kind of excited to hear about this. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think one of the most complete rooms, one of the most crowded rooms, and I think that's for fantasy where we kind of need to look at. Now, of course, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and then Jackson Smith and Jigba was the first wide receiver taken in the 2023 draft last year. Kind of a letdown year cumulatively, and what part of that was on the QB, on the general malaise for the team. Well, DK Metcalf finished as wide receiver 20 on a points per game basis, but you really wouldn't know it if you had DK Metcalf on your team. Really, it was a pain to have him and know whether he's going to be even a worthwhile start, besides 1 week against Dallas where he was a wide receiver 1 on the week. DK Metcalf, unfortunately, just doesn't seem like he's lived up to some of that early career promise. Where he finished as I think the wide receiver 5 under Russell Wilson. Now he's coming off 3 seasons with low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 kind of production. He's not a hammer, to put it that way, and that's a shame. Just knowing who DK Metcalf is, the way this guy is built, unfortunately, he just doesn't seem to do well enough against zone coverage. One thing about DK Metcalf, this was more prominent last year when I was kind of going through my rankings, but DK regularly finishes amongst the highest in the league for end zone targets. Now he, unfortunately, I don't have the number of touchdowns he caught in front of me, but touchdowns, as we know, is a very boom bust stat, not sticky year to year. You would think a guy who's getting those end zone targets regularly is going to finally have a blow up year. So for that reason, you can never rule out DK Metcalf. Does the public perception turn enough for him to become a value? I'm not sure yet. We'll have to revisit that in August. That's DK. Getting to the other guys, Tyler Lockett, disappointing year on the outset. I think after everyone and their mother pushed him as one of the best values to get in the draft. It didn't really perform that well or that consistently. He did get brought back. I think a lot of that's to do with the way the contract was structured. It wouldn't have made sense for them to move on from him. But I think where that then is going to play a role is in the development of JSN, who I really liked JSN as a prospect coming out. But, as we talked about at the start of the show, if you're not updating your beliefs with new information, then you're doing yourself a disservice. And what the new information is JSN played a role that was very close to the line of scrimmage. He only averaged about 6 yards per target. Yeah. And that is just not very fruitful for fantasy football. Now, where he did kind of make up for that is he averaged about 5 yards after the catch per catch. But that, while that's not elite numbers, that kind of just still puts him on above the quote unquote the regression line when you compare yards after the catch versus ADA. He's still in a place that is not disappointing, but when you're getting so much of your work close to the line of scrimmage, you're not going to put up big fantasy numbers. Now, does the volume increase enough from Lockett, from Metcalf feeding into JSN? Maybe. But where I struggle with JSN for redraft and maybe a bigger consideration dynasty leagues, I don't see where the wide receiver 1 ceiling is going to come in. A lot of people were saying, hey, this is a guy who's basically Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Keenan Allen combined as a prospect. And we haven't seen that on the field yet. So I'd be a little bit concerned as a JSN holder, as a JSN drafter, with perceived value versus production. And I think that's, for me, the most interesting take here.
Even in the short term, when you break it down, absolutely. He was the 3rd wide receiver on this team. And, this is an older debate, Lockett, Metcalf, because they're getting older in the tooth. But Lockett actually had 79 catches. He led the team with 894 yards, 5 touchdowns. Metcalf only had 66, 1,114 yards and 8 touchdowns. It's still interesting to note because Lockett actually outproduced Metcalf, and Metcalf goes higher in drafts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that especially with the Lockett now, maybe the age reason might be enough to convincingly fade. Of course, it's going to a completely new coaching staff on both sides of the ball. And one thing they did note as well is they want to get back to the run game, which we've associated with Seattle for so many years, but actually kind of fell away in the Geno Smith era so far. And Seattle has been up there for pass attempts per game, which is not what we kind of think about with the Seahawks. And the coaching staff have made it a point, of course, coming over from the Ravens. The offense staff is obviously Washington, the Huskies guy, but there's going to be an emphasis on running the ball. And so will that pie that was already kind of small for JSN, is it going to be enough to feed him? We'll have to see.
Right. On the defensive back side of the ball, and you know what we didn't touch on? It's kind of funny. Remember that Russell Wilson trade when everybody was hot on him?
Yep.
They so benefited with that trade with Denver, man. They got so many picks out of that. They got what'd they get? They ended up getting 19 selections over the past 2 years. They netted 7 starters out of that. They got guys like Devin Witherspoon, Jackson Smith, Derek Hall, Kenneth Walker, Maffei. They ended up building a team off that. And I kind of want to start there with defensive backs. Rookie first-round draft pick Devin Witherspoon. He only gave up 5 yards a catch. Believe it or not, the other guy on the other side, Woolen, who was last year's rookie phenom, he finished with the same number, 5.4 yards per catch. Witherspoon he finished 4th in defensive rookie of the year voting. So both of those two guys are lockdown corners. It's kind of interesting. I like to build a team interior and work my way out or inside. The Seahawks seem to be building their self around, the other side of the ball first, which is fine, but that's what they're doing. But both of those corners are very exciting. They're 16th amongst cornerbacks. They're both tied right now per PFF. The guy in the middle, his name's Michael Jackson. He's not a thriller. He's not a moonwalker.
Is he a smooth criminal?
I was going there, man. You beat me too. He's not a smooth criminal, but he averaged 8.3 yards a catch. Okay, he gave up 8.3 rather. So he's going to need work if he's going to want to keep that nickel roll, whatever. But doable, playable, startable. But like I said, he's not bad by no means, right?
Mm-hmm. Tell him to beat it.
Tell him to beat it one of these days. Weird Al Yankovic, once he starts doing videos about you, that's how you know you made it, right? Mm-hmm. The safeties here are interesting. Gone is Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. Julian Love, for being on again off the field, he started getting a lot of snaps. A lot of people proved that wrong. He made himself a Pro Bowl. He had 4 interceptions, 10 pass defenses, outstanding 103 tackles. He's your guy now. There's no reason opportunities knocking for guys like this. Julian Love is somebody that I'm targeting in leagues because people tend to leaving him out. They're forgetting about him a bit. Julian Love's a guy. Another guy, Rashawn Jenkins. He's your other safety here. He's at the point in his career he's a little bit older. He's more playing that Jamal Adams role, that old role of line of scrimmage. PFF likes him as a tackler. He grades in the top 25 as a run defender. Mm-hmm. So, that's how I kind of see this defense. I really don't know what to make of this team. I can't believe they fired Pete Carroll. I thought he was overachieving. I'm expecting a middle-of-the-pack kind of record. What says you about this team? How do you feel about this team? Anybody we leave out?
No, I think we covered pretty much everyone that on both sides of the ball are going to be contributors for your teams. Tight end, we mentioned Fanta a little bit, but it's not really worth spending too much time on right now in April before we really get any other moves. But yeah, I think middle of the pack, they finished as middle of the pack as they could last year. If anything, I would record-wise see some regression. Just because even if you see an offensive improvement, I think the defense just needs so many pieces. It's a tough division, and are they going to be 7-10, 8-9? I see them somewhere around there.
Right. And going on to our last team, the Arizona Cardinals. Anybody, there's pretty much this whole team can be replaced at any given time. They got some strong pieces. They got some good safeties. They got an interior linebacker. They got a quarterback. They got a receiver. By the numbers, total offense, 324.1. That's 19th. They didn't have Kyler Murray most of the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rushing, 4th, 139.1. Shout out to that. Passing, 184. That's ranked 26th. Total defense was 25th with 355.7. Rushing defense, 143.2. That was the bottom of the league, 32nd. We'll talk about that in a second. Passing defense, 212.5, 13th. I guess kind of what I want to lead with here, Jonathan Gannon, the coach, comes over from Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
He had that Super Bowl NFC smash mouth defense he kind of brought with him to the desert. It hasn't really worked out yet, but in terms of philosophy, you'll see a lot of split safety formations in the defensive backfield. That's kind of their mission statement. A lot of people that know football defense, they know a guy named Vic Fangio. He kind of was he was brought in to be a consultant during that Super Bowl run. So that's where Gannon kind of learned this defense from. It's called the Fangio 6, where everybody looks like they're blitzing, and then all of a sudden they move back into coverage, and then just the guys up front or whatever. You can get exposed if you're not very good. That's what the Cardinals happened to them. Or you can play it with elite players and win like the Eagles did. So the principles are there. We know where it comes from. We know it coming. But this Fangio 6 defense needs explosive players in coverage. And that's kind of what I was looking at for team needs too. I think defensive line, they need some top talent there. Cornerbacks were musical chairs last year. And I guess as a third one, I put wide receivers. What are they saying in the NFL draft? They're targeting Marvin Harrison Jr., which should go well with Kyle Murray. What says you about this team, and what says you about these team needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of addressed it there. There are a lot of pieces that are needed, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, not just being the fantasy guy or the offensive guy here, but for me, wide receiver, 1, wide receiver 2. I think those are some big needs. And luckily for the Cardinals, we'll see what they do. They're in a prime spot to get. I'm not going to call anyone generational today. That's for another day. But they're in a spot to get a blue chip wide receiver prospect with where they currently sit in the draft. So I'm really excited to see what they do. A thing to address with the Cardinals is, yes, they have all these needs, but they also have 6 picks in the top 100. I think 7 in the top 105. It's 6 day 1 and day 2 picks, the 4th overall pick, the 27th pick. I'm very curious to see. I think this is going to be one of the most interesting teams to look at how they approach the draft. You know, with all the talk about JJ McCarthy, are they going to move down? Will Monty Austinforth, the GM, then want to move back up as they did last year? They moved down from 3rd overall to 12th and then moved right back up to 6th to take Paris Johnson. Could they do something similar from 4th to 11th, then back up for, if not Harrison, could they get a Neighbors or a Dunze? Could they add capital? I'm very curious to what to see, because it's almost a blank slate team, and with the tools to address that blank slate.
Well, one thing they have is quarterback figured out, right?
Yep. And Kyler, I honestly, I have a soft spot for Kyler Murray. I think he's a very fun player to watch, and I think he, it's all well and good to poke fun at him for the hey, it's a double XP COD weekend today. Take Kyler out of your lineups, or the contract where they mandated that he has to turn off his screens during study time. A lot of people have made fun of Kyler Murray, kind of said this is not the quarterback of the future, the talk of the contract. And he quietly came back and was QB 9 for on a points per game basis coming off his ACL tear. Nothing too phenomenal, but he was decent. He also added 30 rushing yards on the ground, even as early as last year. Now another year removed from the ACL tear. Hopefully 1 or 2 wide receivers coming in, and a quarterback that has never finished lower than QB 6 from a points per game basis. I actually, I've been kind of lukewarm, if slightly positive, over the last few QBs we've talked about. I think Kyler Murray is one of my biggest targets, both in redraft and in dynasty leagues this offseason. I think he's going to be he's going to go a little bit after your Strouds and Burrows, but
and he is,
but if you can get him around, maybe where you get like a Dak Prescott before like Tua, he's gonna be a phenomenal value because of what he can add on the ground.
Definitely a target of mine in Superflex leagues.
Yeah. No, I like her. There's something about Kyler that I do want to, that makes me want to cheer for him. A lot of people are on his back, so I would like if they could prove people wrong.
So with the defensive line, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these guys because I think a lot of them are going to get changed out, and it's a guessing game at this point in April. But I do want to talk philosophy. Last season, as I alluded to, Arizona utilized a very noticeable scheme. They had a 3-man front, and then everybody else was playing zone coverage 60% of the time. So obviously teams looked at that, and they ran the ball at them. And they struggled in run defense. They gave up 4.6 yards per carry to running backs. And then they gave up another 1.65, another yard and a half to running backs after contact. So this ranked dead last in the entire league. Given just how bad those 4 stats are, this is an immediate need and emphasis, okay? So they brought in a whole bunch of free agents trying to figure this out. They brought a guy named Justin Jones, Bile Nichols, Chris Tonga. I'll tell you about him. Justin Jones had 4.5 sacks. He's coming from the Bears, who had the #1 run defense. But when you look at the optics, Justin Jones isn't known as a run stuffer. He's not. His run stop percentage ranked 69th. His rush stops ranked 42nd among all qualifying defensive linemen per PFF. So I don't see him as the run stuffer like a lot of other analysts do, but I see him as an improvement on this line. Bile Nichols is another guy. He's another guy that can play the position, but he lacks a good pressure rate. So what they do, they brought a guy in that could stop the run, low pressure rate. They brought another guy in that has a pressure rate, isn't necessarily a stopper of the run. And there's a couple other guys in here. LJ Collier is an unrestricted free agent. He was a starter last year. PFF got a guy named Roy Lopez. I had to look him up, defensive tackle. He was on the practice squad last year. Chris Tonga, he's been a career rotational piece, but he's good stopping the run. There is one sneaky player here, Dante Stills. He has value. He had value as a rookie, as a depth piece. He had a couple big games. I can see him improving his game, but it's a guessing game right now, what 3-4 guys that they're going to have up front. So I'm not going to waste the audience's time trying to figure that out, but those are the guys, those are the usual suspects.
Yeah. I mean, all I'll say to contribute to the defensive line talk is last year, if you're facing someone in fantasy and they had a running back going up against the Cardinals, you were afraid. You were pretty afraid. I remember looking at someone being, oh, this guy has Devin Singletary as his RB2. That's no bother. Up against the Cardinals. Yeah. No, I think defensively, as we've hit on, a lot to work with. Going back to the other side of the coin there into the
good
backfield.
Side of the coin, right?
Yeah. With James Conner. This guy, again, constantly underrated year after year. Again, last year, had a few injury issues, but came back and provided a lot of RB1 value down the stretch. So far, they haven't added to a depth chart that after Connor is very thin. Amari DeMarcado, Keontae Ingram, Michael Carter, all guys have not done too much in the NFL so far. So while I would expect them to add maybe a day 3 running back, they certainly do have the capital for a day 2 one, but will the value be there? Not sure. I still would feel pretty good about James Conner as a value with what he's proven over the years, his ability to handle a workload, his passing down work. This guy regularly gets targets, great on the goal line. And then one thing just to touch on the offensive scheme, they moved away from Cliff Kingsbury's air raid style offense in Kyler's first few years into more of a let's establish the run, go under center more, work up the play action avenue. And so the running game, that's all to say, is a very important component of what they hope to do with that side of the ball.
Interesting. So moving on to linebackers here, Okay, they gave up. This unit has some popular names, so we're going to go over a couple of them. But they only gave up. They only achieved 18.5 sacks for the entire unit. So there's a lot of underachieving going on. We're going to stop at the biggest underachiever of them all, Zaven Collins. Okay, this Zaven Collins love needs to stop. People love him because he's a hybrid. The truth is he's been a below-average linebacker, moved over to defensive line. He's been a below-average defensive lineman. Just to give you context, Rahul, at one point in the season, I forget what week, I couldn't find it, he had a 0% win rate on the defensive line.
Is that possible?
I didn't even know that for a while, but he ended up achieving 3.5 sacks, so I guess the point is moot. But this is the final year of his contract. I'm expecting him to walk. I'm never going to bring up Zaven Collins again. If you're in drafts that are mixed, people draft him early. They think he's good. They're not paying attention. He's not. There is a pretty good name here, Dennis Gardeck. He had 6 sacks last year. He emerged as the Cardinals' best rusher. He had a win rate of 18.3. Before that, he was a journeyman special teams player. That just goes to show you opportunities there. There's another depth replacement, Victor, I can't even say it, Dimmel Ke. He was good enough to start, 4 sacks, 16.8 win rate. I'm expecting one of those two to win the position. In the inside linebacker, we have Kaiser White, Josh Woods. Both of them missed 6 games. Kaiser White's the name to know here. He came over to Jonathan Gannon to be the green dot, to be the captain. He produced 90 tackles and 9 tackles for a loss within, even though he got injured for the season. The Patriots, former Patriot, they signed Mack Wilson Jr. He's coming over for that other position. PFF has him as a starter. I'm not so sure. I think he's going to be challenged by Chris Barnes, whatever rookie they possibly bring in. So expect a camp battle. Mack Wilson Jr. has been a rotational player for a while now, so I'm not quite convinced. Chris Barnes, as I said, was the highest snap count getter, especially after Kaiser White went down. So he at least earns a chance to come back. 2 younger players, BJ Ojulari and Owen Papel. Owen Pope, he's selected in the 5th round. He's still figuring out who he is as a player. He's a depth piece. But BJ's interesting. He was a 2nd-round player. He showed promise with 4 sacks, 13.4 pressure rate. He gives his team a chance once Zach Collins leaves. But again, these are your linebackers. These are your usual suspects. I can see Kaiser getting a spot. I can see Dennis getting a spot. They probably have no choice but to play Collins with BJ in the wings, and then whoever wins that other camp battle between Wilson and Barnes. That's how I see it going down.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of names that I probably never heard of before.
Some won't even make it through camp if you look at some of these PFF grades, like very suspect players, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the only one I probably heard of is Kaiser White. He was one of the lower graded ones there. But moving on to the pass catchers, and I'm grouping them as pass catchers because the leading receiver in 2023 for the Cardinals was actually the tight end, Trey McBride, who, I mean, I think this guy is a phenomenal player. Just you see what he very hyped coming out of college, out of that was Greg Dulcich was UCLA. But anyway, he was the first tight end picked in the 2022 draft and then had to sit behind Zach Ertz for quite a bit until midway through the 2023 season where Ertz got injured and then left, and Trey McBride was kind of unleashed. And I think especially what this guy can do with the ball in his hands after the catch, and now with the hip drop tackle being banned, I think these are the profiles of players that are going to see a kind of boost because of the rule change. Those bigger guys who play in those kind of mismatched roles and get into open field. How are you going to bring Trey McBride down if you're a tiny little, a cornerback or whatever?
Right.
But Trey McBride led the team in receiving with 825 yards. No wide receiver got to even 600. And that's even including Hollywood Brown, who they traded a 1st-round pick for just 2 years ago, now no longer with the team. You also, if I can't even remember. Oh, Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore was another prominent receiver on this team who's now with the Atlanta Falcons. So that leaves wide receiver 1 on this chart as Michael Wilson, who was a rookie last year, 3rd-round pick. Greg Dortch, very, very sneaky. Someone who kind of always produces with opportunity. So don't forget on Greg Dortch. But I'm expecting to stay here a week and a day from tomorrow and looking at a new depth chart. Really, Marvin Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze. Even if they trade down, it's someone else. I expect to see someone different, and maybe two someone's different sitting atop this depth chart after the draft.
I was going to ask you, do you see McBride finishing as a tight end 1, 2 fantasy drafts? Because that's kind of where you have to get him at.
Yeah, that's where you have to get him at with the ADP, and that brings a whole question about tight end strategy, which I think people are going to have to change how they draft tight ends, because we might be moving away from one super.
It's deeper now than what it used to be.
Exactly.
On defensive tackles, there's a plethora of good draft coming in. So
yeah, and not only is it deep, it's Sam Laporta, who had a fantastic year, only ended up with around 12 half PPR points a game. So and Trey McBride, even if you isolate for when he really took over the starting role and Zach Ertz wasn't available, was only also around 12 and a half points per game. The elite ceiling may come. It's not there yet. And at that price point, then I might, tend to go for an Evan Ingram or a David Njoku many, many rounds later. I think Trey McBride is going to be a top 3, top 4 tight end based on what we saw.
Fair.
Does that mean he returns value? I'm not sure yet.
Right. Moving on to this final category, defensive backs. What I can kind of tell you in short, you got really good elite safety options and you have suspect corner play. Like the cornerbacks are horrible. There's musical chairs going on here. I don't see them surviving, especially with the way this is a very good, strong draft class. Let's start at safety. For the last few years now, Jalen Thompson has been the unsung hero here. For real, if I told you who led the unit, who led the team with 78 tackles, you wouldn't think it was Thompson. He had 58 solos out of 78. So he led the team with solo tackles. Okay. Usually when a safety leads a team on tackles or solos, that usually tells you there's something going on with the linebacker. That's usually a key. But Thompson was great. 78 tackles, 58 solos, 5 tackles for loss, a sack, 4 interceptions, 9 pass breakups, forced fumble. He generally goes unnoticed. You can generally draft him as a DB 2 or 3, and he'll play, bottom tier 1 stats for you. Now, his partner on the other side, he's a popular name. He gets drafted high. His name's Budda Baker. Here's what's interesting about him. He was the only player on this team to make the Pro Bowl, and he made it 5 seasons in a row, okay? He also missed 5 games this year. So let me just say it again. The guy made the Pro Bowl for a team that stinks, and he missed 5 games. Now, here's what else is interesting about him. He had 0 sacks, 0 interceptions, 0 forced fumbles. He did have 87 tackles in 58 solos. So to the untrained eye, you're probably like, oh, great, here goes the Pro Bowl voting's off again. Not really. It just goes to show you the amount of respect and love this guy has in the NFL. I mean, teams are afraid. They don't even throw at him. They target away from him. Hence, that's why he doesn't have any big plays, interception, sacks. He's still able to have the team plays 87 tackles, whatnot. He's still making it. That's why he went to Hawaii this year. He only played 12 games, didn't have to. And he was a starter on top of that. He started in a Pro Bowl. He didn't just go out of sympathy, but he actually played good considering they throw away from him. And he averaged, what did I say he got? He got all those tackles this year. What did I say? He had 87 tackles in just 12 games. So he averaged 7.4 tackles a game despite being injured and despite being experts say it was a down year. I don't think so. I still think he's a top 5 player at his position. Those are your 2 strong suits on this team. We got a musical chairs rotation of a guy named Sean Murphy Bunting. He was signed as a free agent. He's not very good. He gives up 9.3 yards a catch. There's a guy, Starling Thomas V. He gets burned in coverage. You might as well play Starling Thomas the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. They all get burnt. Okay, but he may be replaced this draft. He's not upgrading very well. He had 474 snaps last season. It just goes to show you how bad this team was. On a positive note, I always want to end on a positive note. There's a player named Garrett Williams. He factors in as a nickelback. He was a 3rd-round pick last year as a rookie. He showed some promise as a coverage slot corner. I wouldn't play him in IDP leagues, but the draft capital's there. And, sometimes these players are better in coverage than they are in real life football. Do you know what I mean? So like, IDP, you want the tackle guys, you want this, that, whatever.
Right.
I don't say he's really produced. I say he's more of a coverage guy, but he's a player on a team that's a mess. I have questions on this whole defensive side of the ball outside of the safeties. So I don't really see much out of this team. I see this team being a bottom team in the division yet again. Any closing thoughts on the Cardinals or just the NFC West in general?
Yeah, I just think with the Cardinals, I don't see them, pulling up any trees, really making playoff noise and such. They're quite far from it, frankly. But I do see them having the capacity to be one of the most improved teams this year. And not just for the draft. A big part is the draft and all their capital. But Kyler Murray coming off the ACL tear, another year removed, and perhaps adding, we don't want to go too into what may not happen, but perhaps adding one of the top receiving options. I do see a lot of improvement, maybe finishing 6-11, 7-10 doesn't sound like a huge jump up from 4-13. But one thing about the Cardinals that it kept standing out to me is it was a very scrappy team. You could see a lot of heart, and as cliched and maybe surface level as that sounds, you could actually see it. I think when the Cardinals played, they always lost in a way that would make the team proud. And that doesn't mean much, but
that's an interesting take.
Yeah, but going into a new year, that could materialize more in the wins and losses column.
Heck yeah. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Rahul. Thanks for coming on the show tonight. This is what we have for my audience on Spotify. They can't see my screen. I'm literally pulling up IDP Plus. We have great articles over there. I kind of went a little more in depth, if you can imagine that. I kind of went more in depth in what the schemes look like. Check out my articles. I'm doing the whole division conference, covering down on the defensive side of the ball. Again, thanks for coming on the show. And if you don't mind, can you tell the audience at home where they could find you or what you're working on?
Yeah, Steve, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. Honestly, 2 hours flew by. Had a great time and really learned a lot to my game. Kind of like I was saying, I'm still new to the fantasy football, to the NFL, and I actually feel like I almost had like a masterclass session with you. So I appreciate the detail that you went into. Yeah.
This is all you need, though, right here. This is all you need.
It is. It also opened me up to the way that you and people who play IDP think about the game. It's different, and from offense, it's more. Yeah, the offense is being scored, but you have to think of it a different way with IDP. But anyway,
faster paced. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, as I said, thank you so much. But you can find me, Rahul, at nrahul11 on Twitter. I am the co-host of a show, The Fantasy Assessment, which is being hosted by Going for Two. The website, also great articles there. Come check out the content there on the YouTube channel as well. I'm also ramping up my work here and there. Maybe I'm moving up the depth chart, if you will. But I was just recorded a podcast yesterday that'll be out on iHeartRadio this week. Be on our draft coverage next week, and hopefully more podcasts and content here and there. So that's all I'll say. Thank you so much, Steve, for having me on.
Welcome.
Had a great time.
I was gonna ask you that too. I know Jeff over there Going for Two. They're doing a draft coverage. Are you going to be a part of that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Unfortunately, as the West Coast resident, I'm picking up the graveyard shift, but I'll be live at 10 p.m. EST through midnight on day one of the draft, April 25th. So please come and join us, and we'll have a good time.
Heck yeah. Thank you for coming on. The audience at home, we appreciate you. Enjoy my work. Enjoy Rahul's work. We're on Spotify. We're both on but Apple, you're on iHeart. And again, tune in next week. We'll have another great show. And happy drafts, everybody. Happy draft season. We'll see you soon.
Yeah.